Well, in this presentation, I would like to talk about why banks fail, both in advanced countries and emerging markets and developing countries. From history, many banks have had to fail. So the question has always been, why do banks fail? Well, a bank fails when it can't meet its financial obligations to both creditors and depositors. This could occur because the bank in question has become insolvent or because it no longer has enough liquid assets to fulfill its payment obligations. The most common cause of bank failure has been as a result of the fact that the value of the bank's assets has fallen below the market value of its liabilities. These liabilities are the obligations to both creditors and depositors. And such a situation might happen because the bank loses so much money on its investments. Effort has always been made by risk experts and other modelers to try and predict and forecast when a bank can fail or when a bank will fail. Quite often, such forecasts, such predictions are not usually very accurate. And that's because there are a lot of factors outside the control of the forecaster. Some effort have also been made to try and predict bank failure by conducting a stress test. All said and done, most of these efforts do not predict 100% when a bank or if a bank would fail. So let's just try and summarize from the literature the reasons why banks fail. One of them has to do with the fact that such a bank fails to diversify its operations, therefore, or thereby suffering from concentration risk. When a bank fails to diversify, once there's a hit on its business, it's usually very difficult for such a bank to survive. And so the lesson is that banks should try to diversify their operations and portfolio so as not to suffer from concentration risk. The other reason why banks fail has to do with the fact that some banks offer products and services for which they have no clue. They do not understand the products. And so when you have a smart guy can use such an opportunity to mislead and to undermine, play game with the system. And before you know it, such a bank has failed, even without management and board being aware of it. So the lesson is, do not, as a bank, offer products and services which you do not understand. The third has to do with the poor management of risk. And that has always been a recurring decimal. In most of the cases of bank failure, this is always a major factor. And so many of these banks that fail, they created bad loans because they do not have, the right architecture and the poor risk management, architecture and information to be able to manage such risk. The result is bank failure. Then we can also talk about the mismatch between assets and liabilities of such banks. In most of the cases, major cause of the failure of banks has to do with that mismatch. So a situation whereby you have the assets are mostly long-tenured while liabilities are short-tenured, that is a recipe for disaster. So most of these banks have most of their assets being long-tenured. So for instance, a commercial bank, giving out long-term loans when the sources of funding are short-tenured, you'll find that a situation will come where you suffer from liquidity funding, thereby leading to the failure of such a bank. We can also talk about proprietary trading and the activities of rogue traders. The Barings Bank case is very fresh in our minds, even though it took place way back. But the lesson is that proprietary trading and the activities of rogue traders have to be clearly minimized and carefully managed and watched. Rogue traders should not be allowed to have field day. Many of the cases of bank failures are as a result of the activities of rogue traders. We can also mention very quickly many banks engage in a lot of insider lending and insider trading. There's nothing wrong in lending loans to insiders, but the point is it has to be within approved limits, and they must also be reported to the regulator so as to ensure that they are carefully monitored and managed. In most of these cases of bank failures, such activities, insider trading or insider lending, were never reported to regulators. And then many of these loans went bad because such banks didn't have the muscle to be able to compel such defaulters to pay back loans. The result is that such banks suffer from illiquidity. And then, of course, weak corporate governance. That is very, very close and very dear to my heart. I believe very strongly that for a bank to succeed and to be resilient, it has to ensure that there's, apart from having robust risk management architecture, there also has to be compliance with regulations and internal policies. But more importantly, it has to be supported with strong corporate governance. So I hope these courses are taken note of, and living banks, but banks that are living must be able to avoid these problems so that banks do not fail. Thank you very much.